I decided to redesign and do my best to fix the worst Jujutsu Kaisen manga cover. Now before you get angry in the comments because I'm throwing shade at JJK, I promise I love the show and the manga, but there's always going to be things that are flaws that could be addressed. And if I'm being honest, the manga cover for volume 26 is,
Bro, what is this? Why does he look like that?
Anyways, I want to redraw the cover in my art style whilst taking direct inspiration from Akutami since it is his original artwork. I also saw some other content creators doing the same thing recently and decided since I want to be different that I would actually draw 2 covers instead of 1. Since I needed a bit of a warm up before redesigning volume 26, I decided let's just get straight into the process with designing the first one and stick around because you won't want to miss my remake of volume 26. So for starters, I was trying to decide what cover I should draw first to get into the flow of things, and get comfortable with the process before I try to fix this monstrosity. Honestly, looking at all the covers, I really find myself wanting to remake the first volume. It has so much going on for it, and I honestly love the posing and expression used for Itadori. I think I could put my own twist on this and make it unique, while also keeping the same key aspects. After choosing which volume I wanted to remake, I started the process right away. I didn't really have to prepare anything besides the idea I already had in mind, so I began the sketching process. I began with the face shape, as I always do, since it makes the rest of the character's features, like the eyes, nose, and mouth, much easier to place within the confines of the anatomy. I can also kind of see, like right away, how big or small the character's face is going to be on the cover, and in my personal opinion, I kind of love making the focal point of the designs the character themselves, and their face in particular is quite important. The more details I started adding, the more it started to come together. I added in the mouth to see how high or low I would need to place the nose, and then continued upwards with the eyes and eyebrows, and was liking how the sketch looked so far. Throughout the video, you're gonna see me like constantly flipping the canvas, and that's because sometimes our brains don't realize how lopsided or irregular something can be until we flip it around. So obviously it's kind of important to make sure it looks fine on both sides. After adding in a bit more of the small details of the face, I continued with his neck and then uniform. I always loved how JJK draws their characters' outfits. In particular, the uniforms themselves have always looked so cool to me, and I had a lot of fun drawing it for the first time. Once I finished the main shape of the uniform, I started trying to figure out how I wanted his hands to be placed. This was one of the main concepts I wanted to change in my design, since I wanted to show both of his hands instead of just one with Sukuna's mouth. I tried looking up references of a guy holding his wrist and showing his palms, but couldn't find any good ones, so I was basically doing it all from my imagination. This isn't always the safest and best idea when drawing art, since references are extremely useful and super important to keep things accurate, but there was just a specific idea I had in my mind that I wanted to capture, and since I couldn't find any resources, I just did my best with my brain. I definitely took my time with this portion, since hands are one of the most complicated and important parts of this cover, so I sketched the positioning over and over until finally something stuck and felt right. I knew I wanted him holding his wrist and showing his palm towards us, almost to show that he's not in full control of his abilities yet, and holding his wrist is like a way to signify that he's trying to keep it in place and keep it under control. I then sketched in Sukuna's mouth once I was happy with the shape of his hand and was really starting to like how it was turning out. I was properly capturing the idea I had in mind and was super pleased with the result of my sketching, so I decided to clean up the line art. After cleaning things up, I started with his hair. I always tend to notice that hair is one of the most defining features of a character. Every single time I draw a character, I always find myself thinking that they don't properly resemble them before I draw the hair in. So once I drew in this messy spiky style of the hair that Itadori has, I started to see him come together. I then made some small adjustments to the drawing and was happy with it so far. I then started in drawing Sukuna's arm behind Itadori like in the original cover. I found this to be one of the easiest parts of the drawing and loved how it turned out. I added lots of like little lines and different effects with my pen to give it texture and grit so that it kind of matches the aesthetic of like the bruised, bloody look his arms and fingers have. Once the line art was fully complete, I realized that I had never actually colored any of my manga on this channel yet for you guys. So this would be a really cool experience to show you guys my process and also let you guys in on some art tricks and secrets. So to start, what I did was I made a new layer underneath my line art layer, and I just started adding in the base colors of the drawing. I wanted to keep things simple to start and see how accurately I could place the colors so that it fits the character. I used the smart selection tool to fill in things, and then also like cleaned up whatever areas it didn't correctly select. I then also added in the colors I noticed, and it started to really come together. At the end of the day, the colors kind of make or break this cover, and it genuinely helps portray this character and the vibe so much better. Okay, so I just finished adding in all the flat colors and now it looks really cool. I'm going to show you guys how I do the shading and also some extra details. So to start, I added a new layer above the coloring layer and clipped it to the coloring layer. Clipping it means that it'll only draw inside the layer it's clipped to, so I can make sure that it does not overpass the lines and stays within the confines of the area. Since this isn't a really like extremely detailed piece, I made the color layer all in one layer. If it was a more intricate piece, then I would suggest a better option being to separate each color individually so that you could properly adjust and refine each section of the drawing. Most of the time for things like anime or manga, they don't need to do this because the main shading method is known as cell shading. What this means is it is only ever using one or two extra colors to portray shadows and lighting. So it leans into a more artistic approach rather than realistic. To start with the shading process, I first color picked the skin tone since I was going to start with his face and hands first, and then chose a more saturated and darker tone of the same color. A mistake I see a lot of artists use is that they just choose black or dark purple and lower the opacity, and then use that for every shadow in the drawing. Now this isn't entirely wrong, but it also doesn't give you as detailed of a result, and can leave lots of areas looking washed out or just plain wrong. So instead, I would recommend that you just color pick a darker, more saturated version of the area you wish to shade in. I then started placing the shadows alongside the areas of where they would normally be. It's important to use things like references or other ways to see how the shadows fall alongside someone's face, as a person's face isn't just a flat block, and has lots of different shapes and different sections. After coloring in all the areas of his face and hands, I was pleased with how the shading turned out for his skin. I then moved on to the rest of the drawing, like his hair, clothes, and the large hand behind him. To give some areas a bit more of a texturally and painterly feel, I added a slight spray tool and blended it in with a brush effect. This slight difference really adds a lot to an art piece and makes it stand out from regular cell shading. After adding in the effects and cleaning up all the sections that were bothering me, I started coloring in the background to the best of my ability to try and match the original work. After finishing that up, I was basically done. This looks awesome and honestly matches my art style quite nicely whilst keeping the same charm and aspects that made the original cover so beautiful. I was super pleased with the result and posted the full quality cover in the description on my Patreon if you're interested. I also posted the CLIPSTUDIO file if you want to go through each layer and see the art piece by piece. I'm going to start posting all the files, even the ones where I make my manga on there. The files are only going to be accessible if you become VIP, so if you're interested in supporting me and the channel, then you can access some pretty cool benefits. Anyways, I took a small gaming break to clear my mind and was ready to fix the abomination that was waiting for me. When starting this cover, I really tried to think about what people didn't like about the cover, and clearly that was how Gojo looked. I realized from the start that anime Gojo and manga Gojo are almost completely different designs. Me personally, like most fans of JJK, prefer the anime's design, but it does make sense that he looks older in the manga as he isn't in his teens anymore when the story takes place. Either way, I wanted to lean more into the anime style of Gojo, along with his earlier designs in the manga. I started drawing in his face shape and upper shoulders to give him a defining stance that resembles the original cover, and was extremely focused on replicating his expression and keeping the contents of the cover similar, but fixing what went wrong with the design. I wasn't trying to completely remake the concept, I just kinda wanted to fix it. After drawing in his facial details, which took me quite a bit of time, It was hard capturing that Gojo sort of aura. I then moved on to his hair, which was super fun, trying to match the strands from the original whilst keeping my art style and replication of his original design. After finishing in the rough sketch, I decided to move on to the line art, which needed a lot of refinements. I fixed as much as I could and kinda just kept moving forward with the design. I started to really feel this cover take shape as I added in more details to his eyes and hair, and he genuinely looked more like Gojo than the original, in my opinion. I then finished the line art and wanted to add line depth to areas that needed it. When drawing line art, there's a simple yet effective tool that most pros use, which is what really makes your line art stand out and pop. It's basically as simple as adding in line thickness where it is needed and shortening areas where it's not. This trick is super easy and simple, but it really makes the line art go from basic and standard to a more professional and pleasing to look at piece of art. After adding in the line depth in the areas it felt necessary, like around the edges of the hair and the areas of his clothing, I then moved on to the coloring process. It's basically the exact same method I used for Itadori, so I started with the base color layer, which was under the line art layer. I then placed each color in its respective spot with a selection tool. I then made a shadow layer and added it in the darker areas of the face and skin. I then for some odd reason jumped straight into the texturing and details of the piece before finishing the shading. I think I like subconsciously was itching to get to the cool effects and just did it to see how cool it would look in my art style. I then decided to backtrack and go back into the shading of his clothes and hair and was super pleased with how it was turning out. I kept adding small little details and brush changes to give it a more textured look. I then added some snow effects over top the piece and added light cross-hatching and lighting details to his face and clothing. After cleaning up the detailing, I made a background layer to try and replicate the originals. I added in these big sort of water brush splashes and interesting shapes to try and replicate the design that was in the official one, and it started to look really nice. I then added the leaves and branches over top the piece. I used a leaf brush to give myself a bit of an easier time replicating the original, and placed it sporadically all over the area to make it seem more natural and less forced. I then manually drew in some branches and flowers since there were some that really stood out in the original cover, and I didn't get extremely focused on the details since I knew that it was going to be blurred afterwards to give it that sort of like camera focus type of effect. Since the main focus is Gojo and not the leaves in front of him, our eyes aren't trying to focus on the leaves, so it being blurred makes sense and gives it a really cool effect. After adding in the blur and cleaning up any last minute things that I might have missed, I was basically done. So here are both covers side by side to see the differences I made and the changes I decided to do. I was honestly really pleased with how it turned out. Same thing for the first cover, and was excited to share this process with you guys. Like I said earlier, I'll leave the full quality artworks on my Patreon in the description, along with the link to the CLIPSTUDIO's website where you could purchase it if you're trying to do art yourself. Let me know in the comments below how I did, and don't take this video too seriously. I obviously love the original artworks and was just trying to find an excuse to draw JJK in my art style. Anyways, if you got in, oh my god. Anyways, if you got in, oh my god. I can't read. Anyways, if you got in, oh my god. If you guided it. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video and want to see more like this one with some other manga or other types of anime, and it would be a good way to show me by hitting the like button. Anyways, take care and have a good one.